The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
Good afternoon and welcome to Opinion Journal. I'm Mary Kissel. More hearings today on the ever-widening IRS harassment scandal. Here to put it into some historical context is Best of the Web columnist James Taranto. James, you reach all the way back to Watergate in your column today to explain what's going on now. How?
Well, I reach back further than that. My point is that the liberal left in America, the political tendency of which Barack Obama is a part and which dominates our cultural institutions, meaning the media, academia, science, and so forth, has this sense of authority and is undergoing a crisis of authority. And their authority, their sense of their own moral superiority really goes back to the culmination of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and 1965. That gave them a sense of moral superiority. They were genuinely
doing the right thing
on the right side of that, and much of the right was on the wrong side. Then they had the anti-war movement, in which they managed to secure defeat in Vietnam, basically. That was morally ambiguous, but it gave them a certain political authority.
And you're not just talking about Democrats. You're talking about a broader group here.
I'm talking about the liberal left in America, which increasingly has become identified with the Democratic Party because, you know, these various events contributed to the ideological polarization of the parties, made the Democrats more conservative, more liberal, the Republicans more conservative. It was kind of a sorting process. Then there was Watergate, which enhanced the left's sense of superiority by discrediting the opposition, the political opposition. Now, since Watergate, Republicans have maintained basically political parity. They've won half the presidential elections. They've, they took over the House, and they've remained competitive politically. But the left dominates the cultural institutions, and so what happens is we're constantly being berated about the left's moral superiority and the right's moral inferiority. This is why you so often hear about racism with things that have nothing to do with racism. I mean, two liberal columnists, at least, Donna Brazil, the Democratic strategist who writes for CNN, and Richard Cohen of the Washington Post, have both called the IRS scandal a lynch mob.
A political lynching of the Democratic Party.
Referring to, this is astonishing.
It is.
Referring to government officials who abused their power to persecute dissenters as victims of a lynching. But what is this? It's one of these racial dog whistles. They're trying to stir up age-old racial resentments in something that really has nothing to do with race, except in as much as race is related to this this left-wing feeling of their own moral superiority.
So if I understand you correctly, this IRS scandal is damaging to this moral authority because these institutions have supported big government and supported this bureaucracy, which has really gone after the political speech of others. Is that correct?
Well, there are 2 points here. The IRS scandal is a product of this left-wing moral authority. Because what happens when you have moral authority? It creates a moral hazard. It creates it creates a temptation to think of yourself as being on the side of goodness and light and your opponents as just being evil. Now, if you look at what was being said in the mainstream media about the Tea Party between 2009 and 2011, it was this Manichaean worldview. This is the sort of thing that was in the air. This is what led the IRS to think, oh, it's our patriotic duty to fight these extremists, I believe. But it also threatens that moral authority because, now we have the president who, better than any other president, represents this cultural tendency. I mean, Bill Clinton was sort of there, but he was also a middle American.
Not to the same extent.
Barack Obama is purely a creature of the liberal elite. He would be more at home in the faculty lounge than anywhere else. So it's a crisis because it shows how this sense of authority has corrupted this political tendency.
A sense of authority leads to corruption. Power corrupts absolutely. Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
And moral power corrupts in its own particular way.
In its own particular way. Best of the Web columnist James Taranto. I'm going to ask you to stay with us now because we're going to turn to our Best of the Mail segment where our columnists answer your questions. On Friday, James Taranto argued that the IRS scandal is being downplayed on the left because they instinctively, particularly the media, protect the president. But if their bureaucracy is targeting groups for political ends on their own without direction from the president or the White House, that's a pretty big problem, too. So I'm going to ask him to stay with us now, best of the web columnist James Taranto, to answer the first question. In this one, it is a little bit of an attack on you, James.
Oh, no.
Here we go. Taranto hints but never fully develops a new GOP narrative that Romney would have won the election if the IRS scandal was exposed last fall. That's from John Kriegsman. Your response?
Well, I don't know about if it was exposed. The real question here is, would Barack Obama have won a clean election? We now know it wasn't a clean election because the IRS was acting in ways that suppressed people who were trying to support the other side. You know, in 1972, Richard Nixon won re-election after the Watergate dirty tricks, but he won by such a huge margin. It was over 20%, his margin of victory, and he won 49 states. You can't really plausibly argue Nixon wouldn't have won but for Watergate. Would Barack Obama have won but for the abuse of the IRS? We really don't know that. That's why I wrote in my column.
We'll never know.
That's why I wrote in my column that Obama deserves an asterisk by his name, just like Lance Armstrong. Lance Armstrong might have won those bicycle races if he weren't on steroids, but we don't know, and it taints it.
Well, the next reader brings up the question of the media and of double standards. Let's put that one up on the screen. And I quote, "So President Obama has led an administration that shamefully has used the IRS, ATF, EPA, and the State Department for partisan gains. And the response from much of the press is that we need to be wary of Republicans using the investigations of these abuses for partisan purposes." That's Eric Hansen. James?
Yeah, we should point out the list of agencies is not comprehensive. There are others too. But yeah, of course. I mean, the media, the point I made in my column yesterday, in fact, is that the media bias has been a problem for a long time. The media have been on the left for decades. But this is the first time that the bias of the media has been so closely aligned with the interests of the party in power. So the media have actually been behaving very much like the state-controlled media in an authoritarian regime.
Big statement. The reader talks a little bit about the Teflon president. Here we go. Quote, when you Wall Street Journal guys going to come to the realization that you're dealing with the Teflon prez? Nothing has or ever will stick to this guy. It's always somebody else's fault. Dean Pendergrass. So again, this question of, the media is already in the tank, so why don't you just give up and go home, James?
Well, I don't know. First of all, we're part of the media, and not all, just because everyone else is in the tank doesn't mean we have to be. Just if everyone else jumps off the cliff, are you going to do the same thing? But also, I don't know that I'm convinced of that. I think that Obama has been really going through some adversity the past couple of weeks. And the revelation of the Justice Department's overreaching investigations of journalists, first the Associated Press, now the Fox News reporter, they called a co-conspirator in an espionage case. That's
James Rosen.
Right, when in fact all he was doing was interviewing a source. The source might have violated the law, but Rosen was just doing his job as a journalist. The fact that they're going after the press, first of all, it shows that they don't respect the press. You don't earn respect by fawning all over somebody. I mean, so the media have actually not done themselves a service by acting as press agents for President Obama. But I think it's turned some in the press against them. There was a very nice column by Eugene Robinson in the Washington Post today, who's normally a strong supporter of Obama, but he was very tough on not only the AP, but Fox News, which some people thought, well, maybe the press would ignore this because, Fox News is an outlier in the press and they don't like them. And so I think that let's wait and see on the Teflon thing.
Okay, let's wait and see on the Teflon.
If you turn the heat up enough on a Teflon pan, you're going to damage the no-stick coating.
Okay, I want to go to our last question by Norman Blanton, and I quote, "The IRS targeted Tea Party groups. Did liberal groups get better treatment?"
Yes, they did. There were a number of groups that were whose 501c4 applications were rushed right through. We haven't heard any reports of liberal groups being asked, how they pray. Now, the IRS has sometimes gone after liberal groups. In 2004, there was an investigation of the NAACP, which is a 501c3 whose contributions are tax exempt, because its head, Julian Bond, had made various kind of overheated comments against George W. Bush. We actually editorialized against the IRS on that. I noticed last week Senator Harry Reid, the majority leader, said, where was the GOP outrage back then when the IRS was investigating the NAACP? Well, I can't speak for the GOP, but we said something about it, and I couldn't find anywhere where Harry Reid said anything about it at the time.
Okay, well, you're going to have the last word as always. Best of the web columnist, James Taranto. Thanks so much for being on the show.
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.